what do you think it means to be included? Well, hello, good morning. I am in the field behind our house. I got oak trees surrounding me, Bishop Peak over my right shoulder here, and I just thought that this setting was appropriate for the things that we're going to talk about today. So I'm recording this on Friday, April 24th. So 2 days ago was Wednesday, April 22nd, which was Earth Day, most of you know, which Earth Day is this global event that was created in 1970 to demonstrate and voice support for the environment, for environmental protection, protection of this planet that we all have the privilege to be a part of, to inhabit. Earth Day was first celebrated, like I said, 50 years ago in 1970, and it is now the celebration that I think includes close to 100, maybe is over, but over 195 countries. So over the course of the past month that we have been in quarantine, it has been really interesting for so many people, at least in my observation and in my own experience, to return to what I would call much simpler lives. I mean, if you look online on Instagram, everyone is cooking sourdough right now that wasn't cooking sourdough prior to quarantine. I have been making more meals with my family, new meals, trying new things, taking walks, getting projects done in our backyard that I've wanted to do for so long. I have found myself not only paying attention to the environment around me more. I got this app on my phone called iNaturalist, where you take the phone and you take a picture of a plant or a tree, and then all of a sudden it tells you what that tree or what that plant is, which has been so cool to me to just know what these things are. I've found myself wanting to be immersed in nature during this time, kind of like the John Muir quote, "The mountains are calling and I must go." Like I felt like nature is in a sense calling or beckoning me to be more fully involved with it. So much so that I've always wanted to hang hammocks in our backyard, but the problem is we don't have any trees. We have lots of trees around our house and that hang over onto our property, but no trees actually on our property that I could hang a hammock from. So I created these 2 poles that act as fake trees that I can then hang the hammocks from and be underneath the trees. The past month, even though I have been working, it has definitely been a period of rest in a sense, where I've been able, I feel like, to breathe in a way that I haven't for a really long time. The past couple months, if you've been following along in the media, scientists have discovered that these past few months have been doing remarkable things to our planet as well. Given our planet the opportunity to rest, to take a break from us as a species, and breathe in a sense. Air pollution in major cities has been decreasing like crazy, scientists have discovered. It's begun to clear with less carbon dioxide, less nitrogen dioxide in the air, which comes from emissions from cars and planes that aren't driving and aren't flying. Water is becoming clear in the oceans and lakes and canals. The planet, scientists have discovered, get this, is growing quieter, allowing scientists to listen to the Earth's interior in ways that they never have been able to before. But according to the scientists, it's all very temporary. Why? Because we as a species will go right back to what we were doing before, treating this planet as our personal playground, declaring ourselves the apex, so to speak, quote unquote, of creation. And with this understanding of ourselves, I think our understanding of the environment has been that this planet is a resource that is somehow at our disposal. So instead of us being one part of the collective whole, our species tends to think that we're it. In Sapiens, Yuval Harari writes this. He says, "We are more powerful than ever before, but have very little idea what to do with all that power. Worse still, humans seem to be more irresponsible than ever, self-made gods with only the laws of physics to keep us company. We are accountable to no one. We are consequently wreaking havoc on our fellow animals and on the surrounding ecosystem, seeking little more than our own comfort and amusement, yet never finding satisfaction." Interestingly, the topic of the environment has become this very divisive political talking point within the world in which we live, which to me is so sad and oftentimes so confusing, I would say, because we all have the privilege of living on this planet. And yet, we are all so divided on what that then means and what our responsibility should or shouldn't be to the environment. My understanding of the divine, bringing this back to the idea of the politics of the divine, which has been the series that we've been going through, is that all of this, all of it, is saturated with the divine presence. As Richard Rohr says in The Universal Christ, the first incarnation was the moment described in Genesis 1 when God joined in unity with the physical universe and became the light inside of everything. He's referring to the first moment of creation when light was created. He goes on to say, an incarnational worldview is the profound recognition of the presence of the divine in literally everything and everyone. And in my mind, if that is truly the case, then it should change everything for us with regards to our understanding of the environment, our place in the environment, our care for it, as well as our interaction with the environment that we live in. So I want to share a few thoughts about this, and then on Saturday evening we'll have a discussion about it all. So we're going to talk about an ancient creation narrative of the Hebrew people. We're going to talk about a really big number, and we're going to talk about trees, and maybe end with a poem. Sound good? All right. So, ancient creation narrative. There's this ancient creation narrative in the first, already mentioned, that Richard Rohr refers to in that quote, in the first book of the ancient Hebrew text of Genesis. And it's in the very first chapter. And so here's what happens. There's 7 days described in this narrative. Day 1, light comes on the scene. Day 2, the sky. Day 3, the land and the plants. Day 4, the stars, the sun, the moon. Day 5, flying animals and sea life. Day 6, land animals and humans. And day 7, rest. Now, in my experience growing up, I was always taught, or I don't know if I was taught or if I just assumed, I think I was taught that the pinnacle of this narrative was when humans came on the scene in the second half of day 6, and that this was the crown jewel of the divine creative process. So you get to humans on the second half of day 6 and you just kind of stop reading because it's like, we are being created. Like, this has got to be the most important part of the story. But what has that understanding of our species caused people to do. I also don't think this is merely a religious idea. I think plenty of people, religious or not, hold to a belief that Homo sapiens, our species, are the pinnacle of evolutionary development. And therefore, this idea that all of the earth is at their disposal for as much use, pleasure, accumulation, success, that it's all there for the taking. So what things have happened on our planet because of that? Well, climate change. The global temperature has been rising. Ocean temperatures have been rising. The ice sheets are shrinking. Glaciers that have been around forever are disappearing. Sea levels are rising. We're experiencing the most extreme weather conditions our planet has ever seen, in a really long time at least. We're experiencing historic flooding. As we know all too well in California, we're experiencing extreme drought, extreme fire. Allergies are on the rise. I've talked to a lot of you recently who are experiencing really severe allergies right now, and that scientists are attributing the severity of the allergies as well as the length of the allergy season to these climate changes. Light pollution, where people are no longer able to see. There's very few people across our country who are able to actually see the Milky Way because of so much light pollution that exists within our country. More than a third of the world's land surface and nearly 75% of freshwater resources are now devoted to crop or livestock production. And who is this all for? It's for us. Deforestation, with the current rate, scientists believe, of destruction of our forests, the world's rainforest will be gone in the next 100 years. Deforestation is one of the leading contributors to greenhouse gases. So what trees, like the trees around me right now, they're currently absorbing carbon dioxide. And when they are cut down, they then release that carbon into the atmosphere, which is really unhealthy for our planet. Species extinctions, in the midst of what scientists are calling the sixth mass extinction. Only 5 other times in the history of our planet have so many species of animals been wiped out. And the last mass extinction was when our planet lost the dinosaurs, those creatures that we are also fascinated with as kids. My kids are currently really into Dinosaur Train, even though they are in 8th grade and 6th grade, which I just love that they're into this kids show again. But anyway, scientists now believe that species are becoming extinct 100 times faster than they would without human impact. The human population since 1970, when Earth Day was first celebrated, has doubled, while the animal population since 1970 has been cut in half. Abraham Heschel, who is one of the leading Jewish theologians and philosophers of the 20th century, wrote about a different way to understand this creation narrative, which I find not only compelling, but interestingly, very similar to my experience over the last month. His idea was that the crown of creation is not humanity, what happens at the second half of day 6. He says the crown of creation is what happens on day 7, Sabbath, rest. A day that is so often written off in the story because it falls right after humans are created. So again, people get to where humans are created and they just kind of forget the rest of the story. But yet Heschel says it's the most important part of the story. This is what he writes in his book, The Sabbath. To gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. The danger begins when, in gaining power in the realm of space, we forfeit all aspirations in the realm of time. There is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be. Not to own, but to give. Not to control, but to share. Not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. He says not to subdue, but to be in accord. Maybe it's in the rest that we realize how connected we are to everything that came on the scene during days 1 through 5. Maybe we realize in the rest that everything that appears during the first 5 days of the narrative was here long before us and will more than likely be here long after us. Maybe in the rest we recognize the coming together of heaven and earth, so to speak, this idea that we've been talking about with the politics of the divine in our midst, that the divine is present in all of it, not just in us. And therefore, all of this, all of it matters. So let's talk about a really big number for a moment, because I think this big number will help us get a little perspective on all this. So the number is 4.5 billion. I think it's a really hard number for us to conceptually grasp. This planet was formed 4.5 billion years ago. Trees, like these ones surrounding, well, not like exactly like the ones around me, but trees came on the scene about 400 million years ago. About 20 to 25 million years ago, this thing behind me right here, Bishop Peak, formed when a volcanic plug of magma welled up underneath the surface of the earth, underneath a layer of soft rock, and then that soft rock eventually eroded away, leaving us this peak that so many of us love to climb or look at. Humans came on the scene about 2.5 million years ago, but not our species of humans. Our species, Homo sapiens, is about 200,000 years ago that our species came on the scene. So get this, we have only existed as a species for 200,000 years out of the 4.5 billion years that our planet has existed. And yet our impact on the planet has been so detrimental that we have caused irreversible damage. There's a part of this book I've been reading, the Overstory, which I think helps paint a picture of how we really fit into this 4.5 billion years. Other things have done it well. I saw one this past week where they used a football field to kind of use as an analogy. But I like this one, so I'm going to read it to you. This is Richard Powers writing in the Overstory. He says this: say the planet is born at midnight, and it runs for 1 day. First there's nothing. 2 hours are lost to lava and meteors. Life doesn't show up until 3 or 4 a.m. Even then, it's just the barest self-copying bits and pieces. From dawn to late morning, a million years of branching. Nothing more exists than lean and simple cells. Then there's everything. Something wild happens not long after noon. One kind of simple cell enslaves a couple of others. Nuclei get membranes, cells evolve organelles. What was once a solo campsite grows into a town. The day is 2/3 done when animals and plants part ways. And still life is only single cells. Dusk falls before compound life takes hold. Every large living thing is a latecomer showing up after dark. 9 p.m. brings jellyfish and worms. Later that hour comes the breakout, backbones, cartilage, an explosion of body forms. From one instant to the next, countless new stems and twigs in the spreading crown burst open and run. Plants make it up on land just before 10. Then insects who instantly take to the air. Moments later, tetrapods crawl up from the tidal muck, carrying around on their skin and in their guts whole worlds of earlier creatures. By 11, dinosaurs have shot their bolt, leaving the mammals and birds in charge for an hour. Somewhere in that last 60 minutes, high up in the phylogenetic canopy, life grows aware. Creatures start to speculate. Animals start teaching their children about the past and the future. Animals learn to hold rituals. Anatomically modern man shows up 4 seconds before midnight. The first cave paintings appear 3 seconds later, and in 1,000th of a click of the second hand, Life solves the mystery of DNA and starts to map the tree of life itself. By midnight, most of the globe is converted to row crops for the care and feeding of one species. And that's when the tree of life becomes something else again. That's when the giant trunk starts to teeter. Powers writes a little further, this is not our world with trees in it. It's a world of trees where humans have just arrived. We just showed up in the grand scheme of things. We just got here. And yet we've been able to mess things up so quickly. So that's all I want to say about the really big number, and hopefully that gives us a little bit of perspective. Now I want to talk about trees, and I'll end with trees. Actually, I'm going to end with a poem, but let's talk about trees first. So trees. I'm surrounded by trees right now. Not the type that I grew up with, but trees. Oak trees and some other trees that I don't really know the species of. Yeah, I wish I did, though. So what are trees made out of? Like, I look at this tree right in front of me, or this tree right over here, and you look at it, and as a child, I don't know if I was taught this. Again, one of those things I don't know if I was taught or I just assumed. But you look at it, and it's coming out of the ground. So you assume that it's biomass, what gives it its trunk, the wood, the branches, the leaves, that it gets that from the dirt. But scientists have figured out that that's not where they get their biomass from. Mostly, trees are made and get their biomass from the air. See, we breathe out carbon dioxide. In a sense, we lose mass, but trees breathe in the carbon dioxide and they gain mass. I find that fascinating. And I don't know if that has any point to all that I'm talking about, other than that I find it really fascinating. And I am a person who wants to be more fascinated with this planet that I get to inhabit. Trees, all plants in fact, use the energy of the sunlight. And through this process of photosynthesis, this amazing thing that we all get to learn about in elementary school, they take CO2, carbon dioxide, from mostly the air, and in the process of converting it into the wood that makes up a tree, they then release oxygen into the air. This thing that we don't even think about, but we are so dependent upon. During the course of a tree's life, it might store close to 22 tons of carbon dioxide. And if the tree dies naturally, like it eventually gets old and falls over, then that exact same amount of carbon dioxide will be released back into the land. A small amount will get released in the atmosphere, but the majority of it gets locked into this ecosystem forever. But if that tree gets cut down prematurely, someone comes along and cuts the tree down, then all of that carbon dioxide immediately gets released into our atmosphere. And so we currently have way too much carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Trees that used to grow very slowly, and for good reason they grew slowly, so they could become really old trees, which is really important for our environment to have really old trees, are now growing at rapid paces. Scientists have learned that the older trees are more productive and better for our environment on so many different levels. But for commercial forestry, people want the trees young. So they cut them down, and then what do? They replant them. That sounds good, right? It's like I grew up, and the people around where I grew up who did this, they cut down the trees, and then they said, for every tree we cut down, we're going to replant like 3 more trees. And again, it sounds good, but what do? They replant them only to cut them down again, somewhere between age 60 and 120. At 120 years, a lot of trees are still very young, still in their infancy stages. So why are all these trees being cut down? Well, for products that who uses and needs? Us. And for agriculture. To feed who? Us. Because as Powers writes in the Overstory in a different section of the book, no one sees trees. We see fruit, we see nuts, we see wood, we see shade, we see ornaments or pretty fall foliage, obstacles blocking the road or wrecking the ski slope, dark, threatening places that must be cleared. We see branches about to crush our roof. We see cash crop. But trees, he writes, are invisible. If you think about walking through a forest, and I grew up with forests surrounding me in Seattle. Now, to get to the forest, I go to Big Sur or to Yosemite. Those are a couple of my favorite close ones. But they are these places where you have all sorts of different species working together, and you walk into them, and all of a sudden you're entering this thing that is already going on, and it's been going on for a really long time. They've been doing this without you. And now you're entering into this community of creatures that are all dependent upon one another for life, all connected and nurturing each other through this crazy network scientists are discovering of fungi that exists underground. What we are learning about trees is that they communicate with each other about bugs, about disease, about danger, about weather, about resources that they have available to share with others, trees, or other species around them, or needs that they might have, so they let other trees know that they have a need. Scientists are figuring out that trees are perceptive, that they make decisions, that they learn, that they adapt, that they have memories, that they are intelligent, so to speak. Again, not like a human intelligence, but why are we always comparing everything to human intelligence? That trees have this energy or force that is flowing through them, and when they eventually die, they return all their resources back into the earth so that other things might live and experience life. Dying trees start sending their energy even before they're dead to those things around them so that other trees might thrive. I think trees have so much to teach us about what it means to be human, have so much to teach us about time, about community, about caring for others, about being sacrificial, about communication, about working with and caring for those that are different than us, about humility. The Buddha once said, "A tree is a wondrous thing that shelters, feeds, and protects all living things. It even offers shade to the axeman who destroys it." So maybe the idea of rest in the ancient creation narrative is what we need more of. To take more time to reflect on this really big number, 4.5 billion years, that we are newcomers to all of this. Maybe we shouldn't be walking around like we own the place then, but approach this planet with much more humility, much more openness, realizing that our lives are made possible by others, both human and non-human. Maybe we should begin with trees, reflecting upon them, going into our local forest, learning about them, getting to know them, letting them become a part of who we are, allowing them to teach us something about what it means to live. Jenny Odell, in this book that the staff just is about to finish, How to Do Nothing, talks about this idea of bioregionalism, and she refers to bioregionalism as this. It is first and foremost based on observation and recognition of what grows where, as well as an appreciation for the complex web of relationship among those actors. More than observation, it also suggests a way of identifying with place, weaving oneself into a region through observation of and responsibility to the local ecosystem. She goes on to say, if we want to relearn how to care about each other, we will also have to relearn how to care about place. Within the politics of the divine, this environment that we have the privilege of inhabiting is something that I think we need to realize that we have the privilege of inhabiting, because I think a lot of times we forget that this environment is not something that is a resource for our taking. So I want to end with a poem by Mary Oliver called Wild Geese. It's one of my favorites that she wrote. This is what she said. She wrote, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things." That's it. A couple things I wanted to share with you real quick. Some resources that that have helped me become more fascinated with our environment. So I have those here. One of them is this book that I mentioned at the very beginning called Sapiens by Yuval and Harari. And so that's the subtitle is A Brief History of Humankind, which is a great book. The one that I just talked about with Jenny Odell and Bioregionalism is How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, which our staff read, another great book. Received this. I subscribe to National Geographic, and this April issue was great. It was kind of revolving around Earth Day, but it's two-sided, and so it's the issue is split in half, and one side is upside down and like this. So this side is How We Lost the Planet: A Pessimist's Guide to Life on Earth in 2070, which is 50 years from now. Another 50 years, and then this side is How We Saved the World: An Optimist's Guide to Life on Earth in 2070. So great. If you can get your hands on a copy of this, if you want to borrow it from me, it's a great issue. What else? The Hidden Life of Trees, a lot about kind of this idea that trees communicate and care for one another, by Peter Wohlleben. Highly recommend. I have not read it all. I've heard great things. I'm in the process of reading it. Another book, which I think a lot of you know because I mention this book all the time, The Overstory by Richard Powers, which is fictional, but it is just a phenomenal book. And then this last book, which Barrett Floyd is allowing me to borrow, it's his, by Dylan Tomine, called Closer to the Ground, which is great. And then a film by Patagonia, which I just watched the other day, called Tree Line. Talks a lot about trees. So a lot of really cool resources, and I'm sure that you have some as well that I'd love to hear about. So hopefully you'll join us on Saturday for our discussion, where we are going to talk about the environment and our place in it and our relationship to it. Hope you have a great rest of your week.